I was in North Korea a few weeks ago and sat as close as we are with a senior official there who said, very frankly, the United States, the world has to understand that we are now a nuclear power and has to treat us accordingly. What do you think when you hear that kind of resolute statement?
Well, we continue to hear that rhetoric. That's all the more reason why President Trump and our allies are absolutely determined to continue to bring pressure on that regime. The world has agreed that we need a nuclear-free Korean peninsula, and we're going to continue to put all the pressure to bear economically and diplomatically while preserving all of our military options to see that that happens.
Well, let's talk about the military options. Did that come up in your discussion with President Moon? Has he explicitly said, please don't launch a military strike? President
Trump and our allies in the region have agreed to delay our military exercises until after the Olympics. But we're going to make it crystal clear that our military, the Japanese self-defense forces, our allies here in South Korea, and all of our allies across the region are fully prepared
military
to defend,
options.
Well, to defend our nations and to take what action is necessary to defend our homeland.
The vice president comes to South Korea with a guest, the father of Otto Warmbier, the American college student who died days after his release from a North Korean prison.
What do you want the North Koreans to see as they look across and see the two of you? What do you want the world to see?
Well, we want the world to see that not only is North Korea guilty of military provocations, but also North Korea has one of the worst records on human rights in the world today. And the fate of Otto Warmbier is just one of literally hundreds of thousands of stories in recent years of people that have been imprisoned and tortured and killed by this regime. We just are simply determined to make sure that even in the midst of the powerful background and idealism of the Olympics, that the world is also reminded of the truth about North Korea.
We also asked about the Mueller investigation. Will the president, if requested, agree to an interview?
Would you suggest that he sit down and speak with Mueller's office and move this thing toward a conclusion?
You know, our administration has been fully cooperating from the outset. My only advice to the president always is to listen to his counselors, listen to his attorneys, and do what he does every day, Lester, and that is stay focused on the issues most important to the American people.
And while Pence is here, there's that growing controversy in Washington over abuse allegations against former White House aide Rob Porter, and reports Chief of Staff John Kelly may have known about them for months.
Are you concerned that he may have had this knowledge and didn't act on it?
I was appalled when I learned of the allegations against Rob Porter. The time that he resigned is when I first became aware of the allegations of domestic abuse, and there's no tolerance in this White House and no place in America for domestic abuse. That being said, I think the White House has acknowledged that they could have handled it better. And Lester, when I return to Washington, D.C., I'm going to look into the matter, and I'll share my counsel with the president directly.
And what about the Chief of Staff?
As I said, I think the White House has acknowledged that they could have handled it better.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.